When Joseph and his party first arrived in Richmond, they found that some 56 of their brethren had been seized at Far West by order of General Clark and brought to Richmond before them. They were imprisoned in an unfinished brick courthouse, which was then under construction. Most of these saints were later released, but not before they had been subjected to many abuses. General Clark maintained that Joseph and his fellow prisoners should be tried by court-martial and busily searched the military law to find the necessary authority to shoot the captives. Hiram Smith recalled how close they came to death when he stated,
"A young man of the name of Jedediah M. Grant came to see us and put up at the tavern where General Clark made his quarters. He happened to come in time to see General Clark make choice of his men to shoot us on Monday morning, the 12th day of November. He saw them make choice of their rifles and load them with 2 balls in each. And after they had prepared their guns, General Clark saluted them by saying, 'Gentlemen, you shall have the honor of shooting the Mormon leaders on Monday morning at 8 o'clock.
Reluctantly, General Clark was finally compelled to turn over his prisoners to the civil courts for trial. Before Judge Austin A. King, a legal hearing or court of inquiry was conducted to determine which of the prisoners might be committed to jail on the basis of the evidence submitted. Those held would appear before a grand jury for further action against them. The inquiry lasted from November 12th to 28th, 1838. Alexander W. Donovan and Amos Reese served as lawyers for the saints. During the course of the inquiry, the brethren were indicted on charges of high treason and other crimes against the state. When the Mormons supplied the names of those witnesses they wished to have called for the defense, the court sent Captain Samuel Bogart to bring them in. However, Bogart either intimidated the witnesses so they would not appear or cast them into prison. So desperate were the saints to obtain a witness in their behalf that they actually summoned one brother right off the street. Parley P. Pratt testified.
A member of the church named Allen was just then seen to pass the window. The prisoners requested that he might be introduced and sworn. He was immediately called in and sworn. He began to give his testimony, which went to establish the innocence of the prisoners and to show the murders, robberies, and so forth committed by their accusers. But he was suddenly interrupted and cut short by cries of, "Put him out, kick him out, shoot him, kill him." The court then ordered the guard to put him out, which was done amid the yells, threats, insults, and violence of the mob who thronged in and around the courthouse. He barely escaped with his life. Mr. Donovan, attorney for the defense and since famed as a general in the Mexican War, finally advised the prisoners to offer no defense. "For," said he, "though a legion of angels from the opening heavens should declare your innocence, the court and populace have decreed your destruction."
Just before the end of the hearing, a number of the brethren were released because nothing had been proven against them. At the conclusion of the inquiry, Parley P. Pratt, Morris Phelps, Luman Gibbs, Darwin Chase, and Norman Shearer were committed to prison there in Richmond. However, Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman White, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McRae were sent to jail at Liberty in Clay County by decree of the court. The journey from Richmond to Liberty was made in one day. Joseph and his fellow prisoners were again exhibited along the way to the local inhabitants. As they approached the jailhouse, a multitude of people gathered to witness the event. Among those in the crowd was a young Latter-day Saint, Lyman O. Littlefield. He wrote,
"The prisoners left the wagon and immediately ascended the south steps to the platform, around which no banisters were constructed. The door was open, and one by one, the tall and well-proportioned forms of the prisoners entered. The prophet Joseph was the last of the number who lingered behind. He turned partly around, with a slow and dignified movement, and looked upon the multitude. Then turning away and lifting his hat, he said, in a distinct voice, 'Good afternoon, gentlemen.' The next moment he had passed out of sight. The heavy door swung upon its strong hinges, and the prophet was hid from the gaze of the curious populace who had so eagerly watched."
From the latter part of November 1838 to the forepart of April 1839, Liberty Jail was to be the prophet's place of confinement. The crowded conditions, insufficient heat, and bad food created a long and difficult winter for Joseph and his fellow prisoners. In a letter, the prophet described their sad situation when he said,
"We are kept under a strong guard night and day, in a prison of double walls and doors, proscribed in our liberty of conscience. Our food is scant, uniform, and coarse. We have not the privilege of cooking for ourselves. We have been compelled to sleep on the floor with straw, and not blankets sufficient to keep us warm. And when we have a fire, we are obliged to have almost constant smoke. The judges have gravely told us from time to time that they knew we were innocent and ought to be liberated, but they dare not administer the law unto us for fear of the mob. But if we deny our religion, we can be liberated."
Fortunately for the brethren, numerous friends visited them during their imprisonment and cheered their spirits. Commenting on these welcome moments, Alexander McCrae later wrote,
"Among our friends who visited us were Presidents Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. George A. Smith of the Quorum of the 12, Don C. Smith, brother of Joseph, came several times and brought some of our families to see us. Benjamin Covey brought each of us a new pair of boots and made us a present of them. James Sloan, his wife and daughter, came several times. Alanson Ripley also visited us, and many others whom to name would be too tedious. Orrin P. Rockwell brought us refreshments many times, and Jane Blevin and her daughter brought cakes, pies, etc., and handed them in at the window. These things helped us much, as our food was very coarse and so filthy that we could not eat it until we were driven to it by hunger."
While confined in the dampness of Liberty Jail, Sidney Rigdon became ill with fever. At times he was left so weak that he couldn't stand. Mrs. George Robinson, Sidney's daughter, came into the county jail and nursed him during his sickness. In time, Elder Rigdon and the other brethren were finally able to secure an appearance in court. Sidney was extremely ill, and therefore asked for a cot or bed to be placed in the courtroom because he was too weak to sit in a chair. The room was filled with about 100 Mormon eaters, who were greatly excited against the brethren. Alexander W. Doniphan, who acted as lawyer for the elders, was asked by Brother Rigdon if he couldn't plead his own case. Doniphan agreed to this and reported the proceedings when he said,
Elder Rigdon rose and began. Such a burst of eloquence it was never my fortune to listen to. At its close there was not a dry eye in that room. All were moved to tears. At its close the judge said, "The prisoner is discharged to the custody of the court. Mr. Rigdon is free to go his way." The effect of Elder Rigdon's words was such that one of the leading men of the crowd picked up his hat and, turning to the bystanders, said, "We came here determined to do injury to this man. He is innocent of crime, as has been made to appear. And now, gentlemen, out with your money and help the man to return to his destitute family." He circulated the hat, and the money was showered into it till he placed $100 in Elder Rigdon's hands, with the remark, "Now, old gentleman, make the quickest possible time to your family, who need you and your help."
Sidney was released on bail, which meant that he would still have to stand trial at an appointed time. However, as it actually worked out, the sheriff gave him a pistol, a horse, and also provided a guide to take him where his family was waiting. The sheriff then told him to make his escape from the mob with all possible speed. Tired of injustices experienced in Missouri, Elder Rigdon followed directions and shortly thereafter fled to the state of Illinois. The brethren, including the prophet, were returned to their cells pending further hearings. Frustrated in their many attempts to get a fair and impartial trial, Joseph and his fellow prisoners made at least 2 attempts to escape from Liberty Jail. On the first occasion, the prisoners asked Joseph which night would be the best for the escape. He inquired of the Lord and then assured them that that very evening, February 7th, 1839, was the time to go. However, Lyman White said that he would not make the attempt that evening, but would go with them if they waited until the next night. Even though they had no promise of success on the following evening, the brethren agreed to wait. The prisoners later regretted their decision. That first night, the conditions would have been perfect for their flight. Alexander McCrae recorded the circumstances in these words.
"When night came, the jailer came alone with our supper, threw the door wide open, put our supper on the table, and went to the back part of the room, where a pile of books lay, took up a book, and went to reading, leaving us between him and the door, thereby giving us every chance to go if we had been ready. As the next day was agreed upon, we made no attempt to go that evening. When the next evening came, the case was very different. The jailer brought a double guard with him, and with them 6 of our brethren, to wit, Erastus Snow, William D. Huntington, Cyrus Daniels, David Holman, Alanson Ripley, and Watson Barlow. I was afterwards informed that they were sent by the church. The jailer seemed to be badly scared. He had the door locked and everything made secure. It looked like a bad chance to get away, but we were determined to try it. So when the jailer started out, we started too. Brother Hiram took hold of the door, and the rest followed. But before we were able to render him the assistance he needed, the jailer and guards succeeded in closing the door, shutting the brethren in with us, except Cyrus Daniels, who was on the outside. As soon as the attempt was made inside, he took 2 of the guards, one under each arm, and ran down the stairs that led to the door. It being in the 2nd story, when he reached the ground, they got away from him, and seeing he had failed to get out, he started to run, but put his foot in a hole and fell. A bullet from one of the guards passed very close to his head, and he thinks the fall saved his life.
The 5 brethren trapped with the prisoners were captured, put on trial, and released on bail. The prophet and other inmates wrote many letters to the saints and loved ones while held in Liberty Jail. Perhaps the best known of these was an inspired revelation presently found in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 121. Joseph was filled with sadness as he continued to witness the harsh treatment given the saints in Missouri. He had to stand helplessly by while his people were driven from that state. In the anguish of his soul, he cried out,
O God, where art thou? And where is the pavilion that covereth thy hiding place? How long shall thy hand be stayed, and thine eye, yea, thy pure eye, behold from the eternal heavens the wrongs of thy people and of thy servants, and thine ear be penetrated with their cries? Yea, O Lord, how long shall they suffer these wrongs and unlawful oppressions before thine heart shall be softened toward them, and thy bowels be moved with compassion toward them?
To Joseph's troubled heart, the Lord gave thoughtful and instructive comfort as he replied,
My son, peace be unto thy soul. Thine adversity and thine afflictions shall be but a small moment. And then, if thou endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high. Thou shalt triumph over all thy foes. Thy friends do stand by thee, and they shall hail thee again with warm hearts and friendly hands.
The prophet was not then aware of just how quickly his friends would be greeting him with warm hearts and friendly hands. Judge Austin A. King ordered the prisoners removed from Liberty Jail to Daviess County for trial. Joseph and the others were taken to Gallatin, where, said the prophet,
Our trial commenced before a drunken grand jury. Austin A. King, presiding judge, as drunk as the jury, but they were all drunk together.
One of the witnesses examined for the defense was a faithful saint, Elder Stephen Markham. That night, the visions of the future were open to the prophet's understanding. He saw the near approach of his own escape from imprisonment, and also the danger that his beloved friend Stephen Markham was in. Joseph immediately awakened Brother Markham and told him that he must get up very early and not wait to talk to the judge and lawyers as he had planned to do. If he did so, he would get home safely. Markham arose at dawn and rode rapidly to Far West. The mob pursued with the idea of shooting him, but could not overtake the swift rider. Soon after their arrival in Gallatin, the brethren received word that they had been granted a change of venue, transferring the cause for trial to another county or district, from Daviess County to Columbia, Boone County, Missouri. Joseph's vision was about to be enacted. The moment for escape had come. Hiram Smith has given us a detailed account of events leading to their freedom. As the prisoners and their guard left Gallatin April 15, 1839, he said,
They fitted us out with a 2-horse wagon, and horses and 4 men besides the sheriff to be our guard. There were 5 of us. We started from Gallatin in the afternoon, the sun about 2 hours high, and went as far as Diamond that evening and stayed till morning. There we bought 2 horses of the guard and paid for one of them in clothing which we had with us, and for the other we gave our note. We went down that day as far as Judge Morin's, a distance of some 4 or 5 miles. There we stayed until the next morning, when we started on our journey to Boone County, and traveled on the road about 20 miles distance. There the sheriff showed us the mittimus, before referred to, without date or signature, and said that Judge Birch told him never to carry us to Boone County, and never to show the mittimus. And, said he, I shall take a good drink of grog and go to bed, and you may do as you have a mind to. 3 others of the guard drank pretty freely of whiskey sweetened with honey. They also went to bed and were soon asleep, and the other guard went along with us and helped to saddle the horses. 2 of us mounted the horses, and the other 3 started on foot, and we took our change of venue for the state of Illinois, and in the course of 9 or 10 days arrived safe at Quincy, Adams County, where we found our families in a state of poverty, although in good health, they having been driven out of the state previously by the murderous militia under the exterminating order of the executive of Missouri.
It has been estimated that between 8,000 and 10,000 saints were driven from the state of Missouri during the winter and spring of 1838 to 39. With the apostasy of Elder Thomas B. Marsh and the death of David W. Patton, Brigham Young had become the senior member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. On his broad shoulders fell much of the responsibility for seeing that the church membership was prepared to leave Missouri. At a meeting of the brethren called at Far West on January 29, 1839, additional plans were made. Brigham Young presented the motion that they enter into a covenant to stand by and assist the saints in removing from the state. The resolve was carried and the following covenant prepared and signed by 380 men.
We whose names are hereunder written, do for ourselves individually hereby covenant to stand by and assist one another to the utmost of our abilities in removing from this state in compliance with the authority of the state. And we do hereby acknowledge ourselves firmly bound to the extent of all our available property to be disposed of by a committee who shall be appointed for the purpose of providing means for the removing from this state of the poor and destitute who shall be considered worthy, till there shall not be one left who desires to remove from the state.
A committee of 7 men was called to carry out the business of removal. Those named were William Huntington, Charles Bird, Alanson Ripley, Theodore Turley, Daniel Shearer, Shadrach Roundy, and Jonathan H. Hale. It was their duty to see that the terms of the covenant were observed. Illustrative of the thousands who were thus forced to flee Missouri for a refuge in Illinois was the John Hammer family. Speaking of their condition, John said,
"Well do I remember the sufferings and cruelties of those days. Our family had one wagon, and one blind horse was all we possessed towards a team, and that one blind horse had to transport our effects to the state of Illinois. We traded our wagon with a brother who had 2 horses for a light one-horse wagon, thus accommodating both parties. Into this small wagon we placed our clothes, bedding, some cornmeal, and what scanty provisions we could muster, and started out into the cold and frost to travel on foot, to eat and sleep by the wayside, with the canopy of heaven for a covering. But the biting frosts of those nights and the piercing winds were less barbarous and pitiful than the demons in human form, before whose fury we fled. When night approached, we would hunt for log or fallen tree, and if lucky enough to find one, we would build fires by the sides of it. Those who had blankets or bedding camped down near enough to enjoy the warmth of the fire, which was kept burning through the entire night. Our family, as well as many others, were almost barefooted, and some had to wrap their feet in cloths in order to keep them from freezing and protect them from the sharp points of the frozen ground. This, at best, was very imperfect protection, and often the blood from our feet marked the frozen earth. My mother and sister were the only members of our family who had shoes, and these became worn out and almost useless before we reached the then hospitable shores of Illinois.
As the month of April 1839 arrived, the exiled saints became concerned about the fulfillment of a revelation given at Far West the previous year. On July 8th, 1838, the Lord, through his servant Joseph, said,
"And next spring of 1839, let them, the 12, depart to go over the great waters, and there promulgate my gospel, the fullness thereof, and bear record of my name. Let them take leave of my saints in the city of Far West, on the 26th day of April next, on the building spot of my house, saith the Lord. Let my servant John Taylor, and also my servant John E. Page, and also my servant Wilford Woodruff, and also my servant Willard Richards, be appointed to fill the places of those who have fallen, and be officially notified of their appointment."
At the time this revelation was received, the saints were well established in Far West. The community was growing by leaps and bounds. There was no indication that the 12 would have any major difficulty meeting the requirements of the Lord on the following April. However, what a difference the happenings of 1 year can make. During that period, the saints had lost many of their leaders to prisons, and the membership of the church had been expelled from the state. Only a handful of saints remained in Far West, and they were making last-minute arrangements for departure. Their every movement was closely watched by the mob. Theodore Turley was one of the few saints still residing at Far West in the forepart of April 1839. As a member of the Committee on Removal, he was concerned with the final handling of church properties and seeing the last saints off for Illinois. On April 4th, 8 men came into the office of the Committee on Removal, namely Captain Samuel Bogart, Dr. Lafferty, John Whitmer, and 5 others. They presented Brother Turley with a paper containing the revelation of July 8, 1838, and asked him to read it. Turley replied,
"Gentlemen, I am well acquainted with it."
They said,
"Then you, as a rational man, will give up Joseph Smith's being a prophet and an inspired man? He and the 12 are now scattered all over creation. Let them come here if they dare. If they do, they will be murdered. As that revelation cannot be fulfilled, you will now give up your faith."
Turley jumped up and said,
"In the name of God, that revelation will be fulfilled."
They laughed him to scorn. John Whitmer hung his head. They said,
"If they, the 12, come, they will get murdered. They dare not come to take their leave here. That is like all the rest of Joe Smith's blasted prophecies."
Little did the mob know the type of men they were dealing with in the 12, and even less of him who said,
Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away.
Brigham Young talked to those apostles who were with him in Quincy, Illinois, about the revelation.
I asked them individually what their feelings were upon the subject. They all expressed their desires to fulfill the revelation. I told them the Lord God had spoken, and it was our duty to obey, and to leave the event in his hands, and he would protect us.
On April 18th, Brigham Young, Orson Pratt, Wilford Woodruff, John Taylor, George A. Smith, and Alpheus Cutler left the safety of Quincy and made their way toward far west Missouri. As they traveled, the company met Elder John E. Page, who had just turned his wagon upside down and was in the process of scooping up a barrel of soft soap with his hands. Brigham related,
I told him I wanted him to go to far west with us. He replied he did not see that he could, as he had his family to take to Quincy. I told him his family would get along well enough, and I desired him to go up with us. He asked how much time I would give him to get ready. I answered 5 minutes. We assisted in loading his wagon. He drove down the hill and camped, and returned with us. We traveled 30 miles and camped for the night.
Elders Heber C. Kimball and Shadrach Roundy also arrived in the vicinity of Far West from a different direction. Heber secretly moved around the countryside and notified the brothers and sisters still in the neighborhood of the appointed time for the meeting. Just after midnight on April 26, 1839, the saints assembled at the home of Brother Samuel Clark and then proceeded to the building spot of the Lord's house. Brother Kimball remembered the evening as being a clear, moonlit night. He further recalled,
After singing, we recommenced laying the foundation, agreeable to the revelation given July 8, 1838, by rolling a stone upwards of a ton weight upon or near the southeast corner. In company with Brother Brigham Young, we ordained Wilford Woodruff and George A. Smith, who had been previously nominated by the First Presidency, accepted by the 12, and acknowledged by the Church at Quincy, members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and Darwin Chase and Norman Shearer, who was liberated from Richmond prison on the 24th instant, where they had been confined about 6 months for the cause of Christ, 70s. They sat on the southeast cornerstone while we ordained them. The 12 then individually called upon the Lord in prayer, kneeling on the cornerstone, after which Adamondiomen was sung.
the terms of the revelation which the mob said could not be fulfilled had been successfully complied with. Before sunrise, the brethren departed the area. Brigham Young recorded,
We rode 32 miles and camped at the Tenney's Grove for the night. We learned that a mob had collected in different places, and on their arrival in Far West, they found out we had been there and transacted our business.
Although the exiled saints went into several Illinois counties, Adams County being the primary gathering place during those first months, a majority of those forced out of Missouri crossed the Mississippi River at Quincy and located in the area. The prophet Joseph arrived in Quincy on April 22nd, suffering from fatigue and hunger, but cheered as he declared,
By the congratulations of my friends and the embraces of my family.
Wilford Woodruff, just returning from Far West, has expressed his innermost feelings as he first met with Joseph following the prophet's lengthy imprisonment.
In company with 5 others of the Quorum of the 12, I rode to Mr. Cleveland's, 4 miles out of town, to visit Brother Joseph Smith and his family. Once more I had the happy privilege of taking Brother Joseph by the hand. 2 years had rolled away since I had seen his face. He greeted us with great joy, as did Hiram Smith and Lyman White, all of whom had escaped together from their imprisonment. They had been confined in prison 6 months and had been under sentence of death 3 times, yet their lives were in the hands of God. He delivered them, and now they were mingling with their wives, children, and friends out of the reach of the mob. Joseph was frank, open, and familiar as usual, and our rejoicing was great. No man can understand the joyful sensations created by such a meeting, except one who has been in tribulation for the gospel's sake.
Almost immediately upon his arrival in Quincy, Joseph went into council with the brethren regarding a suitable location for the saints. It was agreed that the prophet should investigate lands in both Iowa Territory and the state of Illinois. On April 25th, Joseph and a select committee visited properties owned by Isaac Galland in Lee County, Iowa. Pleased with what they saw, the committee later that year purchased the town of Nashville and 20,000 adjoining acres in Iowa. Joseph and his party next visited Hancock County, Illinois, and on May 1st, according to the prophet,
Purchased in connection with others of the committee a farm of Hugh White, consisting of 135 acres, for the sum of $5,000. Also a farm of Dr. Isaac Galland, lying west of the White purchase, for the sum of $9,000.
Payments on these lands were to come from 1, monies held by the saints, 2, land changes in Missouri, and 3, periodic installments. Other land purchases were subsequently made. Anxious to find a permanent home, Joseph and his family moved to the site of the White purchase and took up his residence in a small log house on the bank of the river, about 1 mile south of the city of Commerce, Illinois. Hundreds of others also began to locate in the area on both sides of the Mississippi River. The prophet described his new surroundings in these words.
When I made the purchase of White and Galland, there were 1 stone house, 3 frame houses, and 2 block houses, which constituted the whole city of Commerce. Between Commerce and Mr. Davidson Hibbard's, there was 1 stone house and 3 log houses, including the one that I live in. And these were all the houses in this vicinity, and the place was literally a wilderness. The land was mostly covered with trees and bushes, and much of it so wet that it was with the utmost difficulty a footman could get through, and totally impossible for teams. Commerce was so unhealthful, very few could live there. But believing that it might become a healthful place by the blessing of heaven to the saints, and no more eligible place presenting itself, I considered it wisdom to make an attempt to build up a city.
Joseph later named the place Nauvoo, a word which comes from the Hebrew, signifying a beautiful location, and carrying with it also, said Joseph, the idea of rest. The unhealthful nature of the swamp was eventually changed by the introduction of drainage ditches along the base of the bluffs. However, this was not accomplished before malaria and other disorders associated with the dampness of the peninsula took their toll. The saints, weakened by their past situation, fell easy prey to sickness. Members of the church were flocking into the community, and having no homes were living in wagons, tents, and on the ground. In this condition, many became sick through exposure. The prophet gave up his own home to the sick and pitched a tent in his dooryard. He was almost completely worn out from waiting on those about him who were so ill. Elder Wilford Woodruff has recorded what proved to be one of the most miraculous series of healings ever recorded. Truly, a day of miracles.
On the morning of the 22nd of July, 1839, he, Joseph, arose, reflecting upon the situation of the saints of God in their persecutions and afflictions. He called upon the Lord in prayer. The power of God rested upon him mightily, and as Jesus healed all the sick around him in his day, so Joseph, the prophet of God, healed all around on this occasion. He healed all in his house and dooryard, then in company with Sidney Rigdon and several of the 12, went among the sick lying on the bank of the river, where he commanded them in a loud voice, in the name of Jesus Christ, to rise and be made whole. And they were all healed. When he had healed all on the east side of the river that were sick, he and his companions crossed the Mississippi River in a ferry boat to the west side, where we were, at Montrose. The first house they went into was President Brigham Young's. He was sick on his bed at the time. The prophet went into his house and healed him, and they all came out together.
Passing Brother Woodruff's door, the prophet said,
Brother Woodruff, follow me.
He then crossed the public square and entered Brother Elijah Fordham's house. Brother Fordham was close to death, eyes glazed and unconscious. Elder Woodruff further explained.
After taking his hand, he, Joseph, looked down into the dying man's face and said,
Brother Fordham, do you not know me?
At first there was no reply, but we all could see the effect of the Spirit of God resting on the afflicted man. Joseph again spoke.
Elijah, do you know me?
With a low whisper, Brother Fordham answered, yes. The prophet then said,
Have you not faith to be healed?
The answer, which was a little plainer than before, was, I am afraid it is too late. If you had come sooner, I think I might have been. He had the appearance of a man waking from sleep. It was the sleep of death. Joseph then said,
Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ?
I do, Brother Joseph, was the response. Then the prophet of God spoke with a loud voice as in the majesty of Jehovah.
Elijah, I command you in the name of Jesus of Nazareth to arise and be made whole.
And the words of the prophet were not like the words of man, but like the voice of God. It seemed to me that the house shook on its foundation. Elijah Fordham leaped from his bed like a man raised from the dead. A healthy color came to his face, and life was manifested in every act. His feet had been done up in Indian meal poultices. He kicked these off his feet, scattered the contents, then called for his clothes and put them on. He asked for a bowl of bread and milk and ate it. He then put on his hat and followed us into the street to visit others who were sick.
Joseph B. Noble was the next to receive Joseph's powerful administration. This faithful brother was immediately restored to health. The prophet then went back to the riverbank for the return boat ride to Nauvoo. As he waited for the ferry, a non-Mormon gentleman stepped up to Joseph and asked him if he would come and heal his twin children who were just 5 months of age and very close to death. The infants were some 2 miles from there. Unable to go at that time, the prophet said that he could not, but would send someone to attend them. Turning to Brother Woodruff, he declared,
"You go with the man and heal his children."
Joseph then gave some unusual directions to Wilford. Elder Woodruff reported,
He took a red silk handkerchief out of his pocket, gave it to me, told me to wipe their faces with the handkerchief when I administered to them, and they should be healed. He also said to me, "As long as you will keep that handkerchief, it shall remain a league between you and me." I went with the man, did as the prophet commanded me, and the children were healed. I have possession of the handkerchief unto this day.
It isn't known just how many of the saints lost their lives as a consequence of the persecutions experienced in Missouri. Some have estimated the loss to be close to 300. This would include those who died in direct mob action and those who subsequently died as a result of privations suffered in the Exodus. In Missouri, designing men had sought to destroy Mormonism through the imprisonment of its leaders and the willful scattering of the faithful membership. However, they were disappointed in this. The Lord miraculously preserved the saints and grasped his prophet from the very jaws of death. Now, gathered in a new land, the modern children of Israel commenced to build a city and a temple where they might witness the salvation of God and watch for his arm to be revealed. Even while the swamps of Nauvoo, then Commerce, Illinois, were being drained and made habitable for the saints, the 12 apostles began their preparations for an extended mission to England. Obedient to the prophecy which had taken them to far west Missouri on April 26, 1839, these men were now willing to further that revelation by parting with their destitute families and answering the Savior's call to go over the great waters. The first presidency of the church met with the 12 and those who were to accompany them on July 2, 1839. The prophet Joseph gave instructions to the brethren, saying,
"Then, O ye 12, notice this key and be wise. Ye are not sent out to be taught, but to teach. Let every word be seasoned with grace. Be vigilant, be sober. It is a day of warning, and not of many words. Act honestly before God and man. O ye 12, and all saints, profit by this important key, that in all your trials, troubles, temptations, afflictions, bonds, imprisonments, and death, see to it that you do not betray heaven, that you do not betray Jesus Christ, that you do not betray the brethren, that you do not betray God, whether in the Bible, Book of Mormon, or Doctrine and Covenants, or any other that ever was or ever will be given and revealed unto man in this world or that which is to come."
Elders John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff were the first of the brethren to leave Nauvoo and proceed on their missions to Europe and the nations of the earth and islands of the sea. They had located their families in some old army barracks opposite Nauvoo at Montrose, Iowa. John was greatly concerned over the poverty, disease, and uncertainty of mob action which faced his family, but explained,
"The thought of going forth at the command of the God of Israel to revisit my native land, to unfold the principles of eternal truth and make known the things that God had revealed for the salvation of the world, overcame every other feeling."
Elder Woodruff had been ill with chills and fever for 13 days prior to starting for the mission field. Remembering the circumstances of that moment, he recorded,
Early upon the morning of the 8th of August, I arose from my bed of sickness, laid my hands upon the head of my sick wife Phoebe, and blessed her. I then departed from the embrace of my companion and left her almost without food or the necessities of life. She suffered my departure with the fortitude that becomes a saint, realizing the responsibilities of her companion. I quote from my journal, "Phoebe, farewell. Be of good cheer. Remember me in your prayers. I leave these pages for your perusal when I am gone. I shall see your face again in the flesh. I go to obey the commands of Jesus Christ."
Although he was very feeble, Elder Woodruff walked to the banks of the Mississippi River with the design of crossing from Iowa to the Nauvoo side. He stated,
There President Young took me in a canoe, having no other conveyance, and paddled me across the river. When we landed, I lay down on a side of sole leather by the post office to rest. Brother Joseph, the prophet of God, came along and looked at me.
"Well, Brother Woodruff,"
Said he,
"you have started upon your mission."
"Yes," said I, "but I feel and look more like a subject for the dissecting room than a missionary." Joseph replied,
"What did you say that for? Get up and go along. All will be right with you."
The ever-positive attitude of the prophet Joseph gave Wilford Woodruff additional courage to pursue his mission, despite the fever afflicting his body. A fellow saint was kind enough to give the elders a ride in his wagon. As they were leaving Nauvoo, they passed Parley P. Pratt hewing a log for a cabin he was building. He explained that he had no money with which he could help them on their journey, but would give them his empty purse. The brethren thanked him for it. They next met Heber C. Kimball, who was also hewing a log for a cabin. He said,
"As Parley has given you a purse, I have got $1 I will give you to put in it."
According to Brother Woodruff,
he gave me both $1 and a blessing.
The brethren were willing to part with all that they possessed in an unselfish effort to assist one another in the performance of their important missionary calling. At Germantown, Indiana, Elder Taylor became so ill that he was unable to continue the journey. Seeing no prospects of an immediate recovery and being in the excellent hands of a Mr. Jacob Waltz, Brother Taylor urged Wilford to continue the journey without him. Elder Woodruff reluctantly did so. These two brethren were again united 3½ months later in New York City on December 13th, 1839. By this time, Wilford Woodruff had been able to secure enough money to pay his passage to England and was anxious to begin that journey. Unfortunately, Elder John Taylor was totally without funds. The following conversation ensued. Elder Taylor.
"Well, Brother Woodruff, if you think it best for me to go, I will accompany you."
Elder Woodruff.
"But where will you get the money?"
Elder Taylor.
"Oh, there will be no difficulty about that. Go and take a passage for me on your vessel, and I will furnish you the means."
A Brother Theodore Turley, hearing the above conversation and thinking that Elder Taylor had resources unknown to himself or Brother Woodruff, said,
I wish I could go with you. I would do your cooking and wait on you.
In answer to his appeal, Elder Taylor told Brother Woodruff to take a passage for Brother Turley also. At the time of making these arrangements, Elder Taylor had no money, but the Spirit whispered to him that means would be forthcoming. And when had that still small voice failed him? In that he trusted, and he did not trust in vain. Although he did not ask for a penny of anyone, from various persons and voluntary donations, he received money enough to meet his engagements for the passage of himself and Brother Turley, but no more. The voyage across the Atlantic was completed in 23 days. They landed at Liverpool, England on January 11, 1840. Proceeding to Preston, the elders met with Willard Richards, who had been left in charge of the mission when Elder Heber C. Kimball returned to America in the spring of 1838. A council of the priesthood was called, and as Elder Woodruff related,
it was finally resolved that Elders John Taylor and Joseph Fielding should go to Liverpool, Elder Woodruff to Staffordshire Potteries, Elder Theodore Turley to Birmingham, Elder Richards wherever the Spirit might direct him, and that Elder William Clayton preside over the branch in Manchester.
Wilford Woodruff journeyed to his field of endeavor, laboring in Staffordshire Potteries, in Burslem, Hanley, Stoke, Lane End, and several other villages. His preaching was attended by many baptisms, and it appeared that the door was open to bring many into the church. However, as he was worshiping with a large congregation in the town of Hanley, the Spirit dictated otherwise. Elder Woodruff said,
"While singing the first hymn, the Spirit of the Lord rested upon me, and the voice of God said to me, 'This is the last meeting that you will hold with this people for many days.' I was astonished at this, as I had many appointments out in that district. When I arose to speak to the people, I told them that it was the last meeting I should hold with them for many days. They were as much astonished as I was. At the close of the meeting, 4 persons came forward for baptism. We went down into the water and baptized them. In the morning, I went in secret before the Lord and asked him what was his will concerning me. The answer I received was that I should go to the south, for the Lord had a great work for me to perform there, as many souls were waiting for his word."
Following the directions given him by the Spirit, Elder Woodruff took a series of coach rides and finally walked a number of miles to Mr. John Benbow's home at Hill Farm, Castlefrome, Ledbury, Herefordshire. The house was located in an area where no Latter-day Saint elder had yet visited. Elder Woodruff remembered his greeting as he addressed Mr. Benbow.
I presented myself to him as a missionary from America, an elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who had been sent to him by the commandment of God as a messenger of salvation, to preach the gospel of life to him and his household and the inhabitants of the land. He and his wife received me with glad hearts and thanksgiving. It was in the evening when I arrived, having traveled 48 miles by coach and on foot during the day. But after receiving refreshments, we sat down together and conversed until 2 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Benbow and his wife rejoiced greatly at the glad tidings which I brought them.
Elder Woodruff was likewise thrilled by the news which was conveyed to him by Mr. Benbow. Wilford was informed that there were in that neighborhood over 600 men and women who had broken with the Wesleyan Methodists and taken the name of United Brethren. Among them were 45 preachers, and the membership possessed a number of chapels and many houses which were licensed for preaching. This congregation of United Brethren was searching for light and
But
truth.
had gone as far as they could, and were calling upon the Lord continually to open the way before them, and send them the light and knowledge that they might know the true way to be saved.
Wilford preached the following 2 evenings at the home of the Benbows. After the latter service, 6 people applied for baptism. Mr. John Benbow, his wife Jane, and 4 preachers from the United Brethren Church. Elder Woodruff said,
I spent most of the following day in clearing out a pool of water and preparing it for baptizing, as I saw that many would receive that ordinance. I afterwards baptized 600 persons in that pool of water.
The rector of the local parish of the Church of England became alarmed at the success of Elder Woodruff. While his Sunday congregation numbered only 15, Wilford was addressing an assemblage estimated at 1,000. The rector determined to make trouble for the elder. Brother Woodruff recalled,
When I arose to speak at Brother Benbow's house, a man entered the door and informed me that he was a constable and had been sent by the rector of the parish with a warrant to arrest me. I asked him for what crime. He said for preaching to the people. I told him that I, as well as the rector, had a license for preaching the gospel to the people, and that if he would take a chair, I would wait upon him after meeting. He took my chair and sat beside me. For an hour and a quarter I preached the first principles of the everlasting gospel. The power of God rested upon me, and the Spirit filled the house, and the people were convinced. At the close of the meeting, I opened the door for baptism, and 7 offered themselves. Among the number were 4 preachers and the constable. The latter arose and said, Mr. Woodruff, I would like to be baptized. I told him I would like to baptize him. I went down into the pool and baptized the 7. We then came together. I confirmed 13, administered the sacrament, and we all rejoiced together.
In narrating the account of the constable's baptism, Elder Woodruff continued,
The constable went to the rector and told him that if he wanted Mr. Woodruff taken for preaching the gospel, he must go himself and serve the writ, for he had heard him preach the only true gospel sermon he had ever listened to in his life. The rector did not know what to make of it, so he sent 2 clerks of the Church of England as spies to attend our meeting and find out what we did preach. They both were pricked in their hearts, received the word of the Lord gladly, and were baptized and confirmed, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The rector became alarmed and did not venture to send anybody else.
Elder Woodruff was blessed by the Lord with unusual success in his labors. The first 30 days after his arrival in Herefordshire, he baptized 45 preachers and 160 members of the United Brethren Church. The field thus opened eventually led to baptisms of over 1,800 total converts by this exceptional preacher during an 8-month period. Included in this figure were all of the 600 United Brethren except 1. Meanwhile, other members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles had also begun their missionary journey to England. Elders Parley P. Pratt and Orson Pratt left Nauvoo on August 29, 1839. They were followed on September 18th by Elders Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. The families of these 2 latter brethren were both ill, and the missionaries themselves could hardly walk because of chills and fever. Heber related,
It was with difficulty we got into the wagon and started down the hill about 10 rods. It appeared to me as though my very inmost parts would melt within me at leaving my family in such a condition, as it were almost in the arms of death. I felt as though I could not endure it. I asked the teamster to stop and said to Brother Brigham, "This is pretty tough, isn't it? Let's rise up and give them a cheer." We arose and, swinging our hats 3 times over our heads, shouted, "Hurrah! Hurrah for Israel!" Valette, hearing the noise, arose from her bed and came to the door. She had a smile on her face. Valette and Marianne Young cried out to us, "Goodbye, God bless you." We returned the compliment and then told the driver to go ahead. After this, I felt a spirit of joy and gratitude, having had the satisfaction of seeing my wife standing upon her feet instead of leaving her in bed, knowing well that I should not see them again for 2 or 3 years.
Journeying to Terre Haute, Indiana, they found lodging at the home of a Dr. Modisette. That evening, Heber became violently ill, and Dr. Modisette attempted to give him some medication. Elder Kimball recalled,
"The doctor said he could give me something that would do me good and would relieve me of my distress, and I would probably get a nap. But the old man was so drunk that he did not know what he did, and he gave me a tablespoonful of morphine. His wife saw him pour it out, but dared not say a word, although she believed it would kill me. In a few minutes after I took it, I straightened up in my chair, complaining of feeling very strange, and felt as though I wanted to lie down. On my attempt to go to the bed, I reeled and fell to the floor. There was hardly a breath of life in my body. Brother Brigham rolled me over on my back and put a pillow under my head, and inquired of the doctor what he had given me, and then learned that he had given me morphine. It was through the closest attention of Brother Young and the family that my life was preserved through the night. In the morning, Brothers Smith, Turley, Hedlock, and Murray came to see us. They laid their hands on me and prayed for me. When they left, they wept. Father Murray felt very sorrowful. Said he, "We shall never see Heber again. He will die." I looked up at them and said, "Never mind, brethren. Go ahead, for Brother Brigham and I will reach Kirtland before you will." Brother Brigham gave them all the money we had except $5 and told them to take good care of the team and make all possible speed to Kirtland. They started the same day. In about an hour after they departed, I arose from my bed.
Elders Kimball and Young arrived in Cleveland, Ohio, near Kirtland ahead of their friends. Their meeting was one of rejoicing. Heber said,
Father Murray was as much astonished to see me alive as though he had seen one risen from the dead. I don't think I ever saw a man feel better than he did when I met him in the street.
The next day, Elders Kimball and Young proceeded to Kirtland, where they arrived in advance of the other elders and fulfilled the prediction made by Heber on his sickbed. This journey was accompanied by yet another unusual incident. While still 400 miles from Kirtland, at Pleasant Garden, Heber and Brigham counted their money and found that they had $13.50 between them. This money was placed in Brigham's trunk, and whenever they had an expense for stage fare, meals, or lodging, they would go to the trunk and take out what they needed. When they arrived in Kirtland, the brethren were astonished at how far that small amount had gone in paying their bills. Elder Kimball related,
Brother Brigham had 1 York shilling left, and on looking over our expenses, we found we had paid out over $87 out of the $13.50 we had at Pleasant Garden, which is all the money we had to pay our passages with. We had traveled over 400 miles by stage, for which we paid from 8 to 10 cents a mile, and had eaten 3 meals a day, for which we were charged 50 cents, also 50 cents for our lodgings. Brother Brigham often suspected that I put the money in his trunk or clothes, thinking that I had a purse of money which I had not acquainted him with. But this was not so. The money could only have been put in his trunk by some heavenly messenger, who thus administered to our necessities daily, as he knew we needed.
New York City continued to serve as a gathering point for the apostles and other brethren answering the call to Great Britain. Here they assembled over a period of several months, and on March 9, 1840, set sail on the vessel Patrick Henry, bound for Liverpool, England. On board were apostles Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Parley P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, George A. Smith, and a 70, Reuben Hedlock. Immediately upon their arrival in England, a conference of the saints convened at Preston on April 14, 1840. Acting upon a direct revelation previously given to the prophet Joseph Smith, Willard Richards was ordained an apostle under the direction of Brigham Young. He was the first apostle to be ordained outside the United States. It was also determined at this conference that a periodical known as the Latter-day Saints Millennial Star should be published under the direction of the 12 and edited by Elder Parley P. Pratt of that quorum. This publication was destined to serve as a highly effective instrument in promoting the gospel for approximately 130 years. Elder Orson Hyde sailed from New York Harbor on February 13, 1841. Upon his arrival in England, he was happily greeted by his fellow apostles. Elder Hyde had received a particularly unique missionary assignment, one which would take him far beyond the confines of the British Isles. As early as 1832, the prophet Joseph had given Orson a blessing in which he prophesied,
In due time thou shalt go to Jerusalem, the land of thy fathers, and be a watchman unto the house of Israel. And by thy hands shall the Most High do a great work, which shall prepare the way and greatly facilitate the gathering together of that people.
This mission was again confirmed in March of 1840, when Elder Hyde received an important personal vision regarding this call. He said,
I retired to my bed one night as usual, and while meditating and contemplating the field of my future labors, the vision of the Lord like clouds of light burst into my view, and the cities of London, Amsterdam, Constantinople, and Jerusalem all appeared in succession before me. And the Spirit said unto me, Here are many of the children of Abraham, whom I will gather to the land that I gave to their fathers.
John E. Page was assigned as Orson's companion at a conference of the church in Nauvoo. However, Elder Page failed to carry out his responsibility and abandoned the mission while he was still in the United States. Elder Hyde was left alone to pursue his special commission to dedicate Palestine for the return of the Jewish people and to preach the gospel in that land. Soon after Orson arrived in England, 6 of the apostles then in that country returned to America. Hundreds of converts had been added to the fold by their ministerial labors. Elder Parley P. Pratt was directed to stay on and preside over the church while Elder Orson Hyde was left to continue his mission to Palestine. Orson had the opportunity of laboring briefly in London, one of the cities of his vision, before leaving for Palestine. In London and in other major cities on his travel to Jerusalem, he sought audience with the principal Jews and told them of the great destiny awaiting their people. On June 20th, he said farewell to England and went to Rotterdam in the Netherlands. At that city, he had 500 copies of his book, an address to the Hebrews, published in the Dutch language. Elder Hyde became the first Latter-day Apostle to proclaim the gospel on the continent of Europe. From Rotterdam, Orson journeyed to Amsterdam and then commenced a trip up the Rhine, visiting Arnhem, Mentz, and then Frankfurt, Germany by train. Traveling down the Danube River, he took passage to Constantinople, Istanbul, Turkey. From that ancient city, Orson journeyed on to Smyrna, Izmir, Turkey, and Beirut, Lebanon. En route to Beirut, the wind died down and the sailing vessel on which he had taken passage was unable to proceed. Food became critical on the small boat. Orson said,
A number of days I ate snails gathered from the rocks, while our vessel was becalmed in the midst of several small and uninhabited islands. But the greatest difficulty was, I could not get enough of them.
In Beirut, he encountered a very tense situation. The Druze, an Islamic sect, were waging war on the Maronites, who were Roman Catholic. Orson needed little persuasion to continue his journey because of the turmoil, and as he reflected,
My heart leaps for joy at the prospect of seeing that land, and there fulfilling my mission.
At last, after thousands of miles of difficult travel, Elder Hyde finally reached his desired destination, Jerusalem. Remembering that rare moment, Orson said,
My natural eyes for the first time beheld Jerusalem. And as I gazed upon it and its environs, the mountains and the hills by which it is surrounded, and considered that this is a stage upon which so many scenes of wonder have been enacted, where prophets were stoned and the Savior of sinners slain, a storm of commingled emotions suddenly arose in my breast, the force of which was only spent in a profuse flow of tears.
Orson Hyde took advantage of his exceptional opportunity to visit a great many of the historical sites of the city and its immediate surroundings. Passing out of the East Gate and through the Valley of Kidron, Orson climbed the Mount of Olives. He related,
On the top of this mount you have a fair view of the Dead Sea and the River Jordan, which are about 15 miles in the distance. From this place I went to the tombs of the prophets in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And on my way around the city I entered the pool of Siloam and freely washed in its soft and healing fountain. I found plenty of water there for baptizing. The pool of Bethesda, which had 5 porches, yet remains in the city, but in a dilapidated state, there being plenty of water to meet the demands of the city of a better quality.
Elder Hyde made many contacts in Jerusalem in an attempt to explain his mission and reveal the restored gospel to others. At present, we are not aware of the success of these endeavors. However, we do know that he could not be kept from performing his primary assignment of dedicating the land of Palestine by the power of the priesthood. Orson Hyde carefully recorded his course of action on that eventful day.
On Sunday morning, October 24th, a good while before day, I arose from sleep and went out of the city as soon as the gates were open, crossed the brook Kidron, and went upon the Mount of Olives, and there in solemn silence, with pen, ink, and paper, just as I saw in the vision, offered up the following prayer to him who lives forever and ever. Now, O Lord, thy servant has been obedient to the heavenly vision which thou gavest him in his native land, and under the shadow of thine outstretched arm he has safely arrived in this place to dedicate and consecrate this land unto thee, for the gathering together of Judah's scattered remnants, according to the predictions of the holy prophets. for the building up of Jerusalem again after it has been trodden down by the Gentiles so long, and for rearing a temple in honor of thy name.
Following his prayer, Elder Hyde erected a pile of stones on the top of the Mount of Olives as a witness according to the ancient order. He also performed the same task on what was anciently called Mount Zion, where the temple had stood. With the completion of his mission, Orson was anxious to begin the homeward journey. His route took him to Damietta, Cairo, and Alexandria. From Egypt, he traveled to Trieste, Italy, and then spent several months in Germany, where he worked to lay a foundation for the gospel. In August 1842, he returned to England, pausing only long enough to assume the leadership of 214 emigrant saints. Orson departed from Liverpool on the Medford September 25, 1842. Crossing the Atlantic to New Orleans, Orson and his company boarded the steamer Alex Scott for a trip up the Mississippi. However, the boat was stopped by the freezing of the water at Alton, Illinois. Elder Hyde then took a land route to Nauvoo. He described the conditions of his homecoming in these words.
When I first arrived upon the borders of this place, I tried to recognize some of the old landmarks, but so great were the changes and alterations that it appeared altogether like another place. I felt something as I did while standing on Mount Olivet, on the east of Jerusalem, and viewing the surrounding country, said I to myself, is this a dream, a vision, or a reality? Circumstances demonstrated the reality of the scenery. So when I come to the residence of my wife and children on the 7th of December last, and shared with them the warm embrace, sat down with them all hanging about my neck, I said it is, in reality, Nauvoo.
Orson Hyde and other members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles had answered the call to foreign missionary service and faithfully met the requirements of their holy office in the priesthood.